Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we are back with ranked recommendations. That's right, a new season of ranked battles approaches here in just a couple of days, and so over the next 2 to 3 days here on the channel, we're going to talk about some of the various ship picks that you probably should be making, some of them that you wouldn't be, you'd be well off to make, and some of them you probably shouldn't make here as we get into the next season of ranked, starting at Tier 8. So let's start by having a look through destroyers. I'll start here with arguably the most important class in any ranked battle, that's right, the destroyer. So, to kick things off on our list, a ship you should be well acquainted with by now if you've played anything Tier 8 competitive, ranked sprint, whatever in a while, and that is Tier 8 Japanese destroyer Akizuki. No list of Tier 8 competitive destroyers would be complete without a recommendation for this monstrosity. I could go on for hours about how Akizuki's main battery is artificially inflated to be better than every other destroyer's main battery in the tier, about how the penetration values on her shells are buffed beyond all recognition, about how her relative stealth married to that main battery makes her an absolute bully against other destroyers, about how her Japanese torpedoes hit like trains, and that despite having only a single quadruple rack of them, she gets access to the torpedo reload booster consumable so she can put an extra set in the water virtually on demand. I could talk about all of that, but instead I'll just summarize by saying Akizuki is a really good pick for this season of Ranked. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but a lot of other people do, so be prepared to see a lot of them and have a plan for how you're going to go about dealing with them. Moving on, we come to the original OP Tier 8 destroyer, Tier 8 Premium Pan-Asian Destroyer Loyang. Loyang remains, even to this day, the king of cap control. Her main gimmick, of course, is her long-range, long-duration hydroacoustic search that's paired up with her American destroyer-style smoke. This is essentially a USS Benson hull, the Tier 8 American destroyer. This combo of that hydro and that smoke makes her a right royal pain in the ass to root out of a cap as an opposing destroyer, or even as an opposing cruiser sometimes. I cannot count the number of friendly destroyers I've seen get eaten alive by Loyang's hydro over the course of various Tier 8 ranked seasons and sprints over the years. It's as if players forget this ship exists and what she does better than basically anybody else. She's not without weaknesses, of course, right? She's fairly vulnerable to planes. It's not surprising. Most destroyers in this tier are. And her torpedo power is a little below average for the tier. This is something that a lot of folks forget, I think. But unless you take her short-range torpedoes, she gets a choice. The long-range torpedoes are fairly anemic. But if you take a if you take a Loyang into a ranked game, you're telling your team, hey, fellas, I'm here to make sure that we own more caps than the other guys at all times. And you have all the tools you need to do that job and do it well. Last on the recommended list, Tier 8 Premium British Destroyer HMS Cossack. Cossack has a lot more going for her than her tech tree cousin, HMS Lightning. For starters, Cossack is one of the few British destroyers to have access to the engine boost consumable, which is damn handy on some of these maps we're going to be dealing with in this ranked season. Additionally, she mounts 8 barrels of these British 120mm guns as opposed to Lightning 6, and these guns melt other destroyers just about as well as Akizuki. Not quite, but pretty close. Now, Cossack does only have a single rack of torpedoes, but that lone rack reloads every 66 seconds. That surprises a lot of players, how quickly those torpedoes come back. Cossack's only real weakness, major weakness, let's say, is to aircraft. And she can mitigate that by popping one of her little short-duration British smokes, right? These smokes come up, they're good for about 40 seconds or so. Enough to piss off the CV player. Most of them at that point will take their planes and go look elsewhere rather than waste time for the smoke to clear. You also cannot discount her short-range 3-kilometer hydro bubble. Torpedoing one of these things is very difficult, but using that hydro to hunt down other destroyers is pretty challenging. Moving on to the honorable mentions, these are ships that I wouldn't necessarily put on the recommended list, but I certainly wouldn't shy away from if you wanted to drive one. Starting off the list with Tier 8 French destroyer Le Fantasque. Just like I recommended Tier 7's Vauquelin last rank season, Le Fantasque makes the list here for the Tier 8 season for very similar reasons. When you pick this ship going into a ranked game, you have to remember that basically you're taking more of a little tiny cruiser than a destroyer. Her detection, about 6.4 kilometers on the surface or so, makes caps less likely in the early stages of a game. But her speed and her main battery reload booster consumable make her absolutely lethal to enemy ships that wander off by themselves. No ship in this tier can outrun a Fantasque once her engine boost consumable is online. She's highly vulnerable to enemy aircraft, again, keeping with the theme. But the smaller maps of a ranked season will also mean that the carrier has fewer places to hide from Fantasque's speed, so that knife can cut both ways. A well-played Fantasque in the hands of a player who knows when and how to use that speed is a thing of beauty to behold, as long as it isn't coming right at you. Next on our list, Tier 8 Premium American Destroyer USS Kidd. Now, Kidd is a Fletcher, so she was automatically guaranteed to make this list, right? I mean, duh. I'm a Fletcher fanboy. What did you guys expect? All kidding aside, though, Kidd is a pretty solid option for this season of ranked. Her AA suite is already pretty solid. She comes with defensive fire, and that defensive fire is getting a buff soon. And that allows her to meaningfully contribute to her team's AA defense. Now, that doesn't mean that she's immune to planes, but it does mean that she will discourage enemy carrier strikes, and if she needs to help discourage enemy carrier strikes on her teammates that are nearby, that works too. Her quick-firing main battery and superb handling make her a great knife fighter and cap contester. She gets the awesome long-duration American smoke that all of your cruisers will appreciate. And if that's not enough, she's one of only a handful of Tier 8 destroyers that get access to the repair party consumable. The key thing to remember when you play a Kidd is that she's unlikely to get massive damage output. When you take this ship into a game, you are there for the long haul. Because of that heal, because of the smoke, you're very, very good at absorbing or dodging damage. So you're there to contest caps and beat up on other destroyers and targets of opportunity. You might get some work out of that single torpedo launcher, but it is a tough road to hoe. Last on our honorable mention list, Tier 8 German destroyer Z-23. I suspect this pick will raise a few eyebrows, and I always like to throw one in here for people that will rake me over the coals and come and yell at me in the comments. I feel like, I've always felt like Z-23 is a bit of a sleeper pick in these kinds of formats. For a ship with well over 20,000 hit points, right? By the time you slap a commander with survivability expert on her, she has quite a few things going for her, right? There are two kind of major knocks against this ship right off the bat. One is the fact that for reasons no one can explain, the German national flavor, that's her hydroacoustic search, is shorter ranged than that of Tier 8 Premium Pan-Asian Destroyer Loyang. Talked about that a minute ago. So why is that? Nobody knows. But the kings of hydro in this tier are not the kings of hydro. Also, the other thing that scratches, okay, not surprising here, is she is allergic to airplanes, right? Z-23s doesn't really have an A to write home about. Once you learn how to deal with those shortcomings, though, and they can be dealt with, Z-23 is a very solid and commonly overlooked destroyer for the tier. Personally, I prefer the 150mm guns because I like the Alpha Strike when fighting other destroyers, but with the recent buffs to her shell penetration, you can make an argument for putting the 128mm guns on this ship as well. Now that's all well and good, Raptor, but what destroyers should I avoid taking? Well, gosh, I'm so glad you asked. Let's start with one of the more obvious candidates. This is Tier 8 Premium Japanese Destroyer Asashio. This is a hard pick for me because I love this ship. I love playing Asashio. She trolls battleships like nobody's business, and you will nearly always surprise people when you open up with her guns at just the right moment to screw them over. But ranked battles are not the place to bust out your Asashio. I'm sorry, kids. She simply does not bring nearly enough utility into a game. Even her torpedoes can only hit battleships. I mean, let's be honest. She's very, very unlikely to find herself in a position to use them against an aircraft carrier, right? If you want to play this style of Japanese destroyer, Kagero and Asashio are very nearly the same ship, but Kagero is a far far superior pick. Leave your Asashio in port, do your team a favor, and grab something else. Another ship on the avoid list, Tier 8 Pan-Asian destroyer Hsienyang. As good as Loyang is, Hsienyang is just as thoroughly meh. Her ability to equip surveillance radar may draw the eye of some players, but her problem is that she lacks the firepower to really take advantage of it in most situations. Her torpedoes are at least better than Asashio's. Her torpedoes remain deep waters, but they can hit cruisers now. But destroyers remain immune, of course. And as someone with a few thousand destroyer games under my belt, let me assure you that pushing up into the face of a Pan-Asian destroyer bothers me not at all, because I know that all he'll ever have in that fight is his guns. His torpedoes cannot hurt me no matter what he wants. I mean, you can make an argument for playing this ship, but it's kind of an honestly pretty weak one. In my opinion, you're better off picking nearly any other Tier 8 destroyer for your ranked grind. And last on my avoid list is Tier 8 Russian destroyer Ognevoi. Now, I am 100% confident that there's some Ognevoi fanboys out there that will crucify me for this, and I'm totally fine with it. I've never understood the appeal of this ship. I really haven't. At first glance, she looks like a poor man's Grozovoi, which is not a bad thing. I really like Grozovoi and her large toolbox of jack-of-all-trades consumables. She's got a lot of different buttons she can push in different situations to give her an advantage. But when you dig deeper, you find some really, really irritating flaws. Ognevoi's main battery just isn't anything to write home about, for starters. And to me, that's kind of bread and butter here, right? Her torpedoes are, in my opinion, thoroughly mediocre. She does get a heal. That's good, because she's really likely to need it with that 6.1 kilometer detection radius. If you're out there screaming at your PC that I'm a moron, hey, go ahead and play this ship, right? Like, that's all you. But for the rest of us mere mortals, I really encourage you to invest your ranked games elsewhere, because there are better options. All right, guys, that's it. That'll cut us through destroyers for today. We'll bring you cruisers, battleships, and carriers before the week is over. Wash your hands, be safe out there, and I'll catch you next time.